Excuse me, if you remember last week or 2 weeks ago, I asked you to introduce yourself if you're going to be speaking in the room, and we'll ask those online to do the same. So we have a full agenda today. I'm State Senator Ann Johnson Stewart, for those of you listening online, and I am the chair. As I noted, we do have a quorum present, and today is October 27th, 2025. So I call this working group, the Electricity as Vehicle Fuel Working Group meeting to order. Has everyone had a chance to review the minutes from our meeting a week and a half ago? And if so, is there a motion to approve?
So moved, Madam Chair.
Thanks, Bentley. We do have a motion to approve. I don't think we need a second, but is there any discussion or changes? All right, then all in favor of approving the meeting minutes from the last meeting, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, all opposed, say nay. All right, the motion prevails and the minutes are approved. So as I said, we do have quite a few members online and watching, so I will narrate the meeting a little bit better than I did last time. So our first speaker today is my good friend and very competent presenter, Representative Steve Elkins, who's spent a lot of time on this topic and is excited to present to us today some of his foundational findings and insight into ways that we might be able to address our issue. So Representative Elkins, when you're ready to go, I will look forward to your presentation.
Looks like I'm ready to go.
All right, excellent. Thanks, Steve.
There we go. So this is an adaptation of a presentation that I prepared to do an overview of my own mileage-based user fee bill, but this committee, and with that, let's just kind of get right into it here. So there we go. So yeah, there's a couple of pages, slides at the front that I've hidden. Is that gas tax revenues are probably going to start slacking out. We may have reached gas tax revenues already. And as EVs, gradually increase their market penetration, gas tax revenues are fine, and we need a way to replace. The guiding principles that I use when I'm addressing these topics are that, first of all, that EVs should pay their fair share for road use. That all drivers should be incentivized to drive less by paying in proportion to the amount that they drive. That vehicle energy efficiency should be reflected in the rate structure. That driver data privacy must be protected. That collection costs should be minimized, and that program participation should be voluntary. Forgetting which button you push to, just enter works. Okay. So the alternatives to the gas tax for EVs fall into three basic categories. So the first is registration surcharges, such as the one we have now, are going to be increasing. The downside of registration surcharges is, and they have become punitive in many states and are also going. Second is an excise tax on the electricity going into EV. At the commercial charging stations, this is fairly straightforward. That's about 20% of the charging. At home, where 80% of the EVs charging occurs, it requires expensive dedicated EV meters in every home, or you can collect the data from the vehicle, such as you can through Excel's Optimize Your Charge program, which I'll talk a little bit about. And the third is basically a mileage tax on all EVs, which does provide an incentive to minimize driving and has already been implemented in 4 states, Oregon, Utah, Virginia, and Hawaii. So again, EV registration surcharges are been enacted in many states, including Minnesota. They're relatively simple and inexpensive to admit. Primary downside, again, is they do not fairly respect the user pay, regardless of how many miles they drive, and they do not incentivize economic use of the structure. So what I ask people to do is imagine what would happen if we charged a flat amount for all the water or electricity we would use. We would have no incentive to conserve either of those, and the actual consumption would rise precipitously. So electric vehicles are generally driven on typically less than an equivalent ICE vehicle. So a 2023 study by IC Cars based on federal data showed that an average electric car is driven 9,059 miles a year compared to 12,758 miles, 12,758 per miles for gasoline vehicles out of the federal database that was used for this study. So the question, you can see how that varies by model, is why should an owner of a Nissan Leaf driven 6,395 miles a year pay a flat registration charge that's based on the gas tax? Large internal combustion engine vehicle driven twice as many miles. It's just not fair. So EV surcharges, as I mentioned, are used in a great number of states. The old are $75 registration surcharge put us near the bottom of the pack. With the data we'll see in a later presentation today, most EV owners are going to be paying one of the highest registration surcharges in the country. So as we got into it last time, we realized that 20% of EV charging occurs at public charging stations. And the Commerce Department, Mr. Wilhite, will be monitoring the accuracy of the meters used in public stations, and taxing the electricity consumed at public charging stations will be relatively straightforward. And we'll hear more about that, I think, from a presenter from Iowa later this morning. But 80% of each EV charging occurs at home. As Senator Howe asked last time, well, what do we do for this 80%? So utilities are responsible for the accuracy of home electric meters. However, utility meters measure the electricity used throughout the home. And relatively few EV owners have home chargers with dedicated meters monitored by the utility because they're expensive and unnecessary. So this is my own personal setup. My car is charged from an ordinary 240 volt outlet next to the fuse box in my garage, just like you plug your washer, dryer, and range into. One end of the power cord supplied by the manufacturer is plugged into this outlet. The other end is plugged into the car. There's no separate meter on this outlet. For all Xcel knows, this electricity could be going into my clothes dryer. And Xcel would charge me, misspelled here, $16.63 a month for a separate meter for the car, which is about what I spend on an average month on the electricity going into the car itself. However, there is another way for Xcel to estimate the amount of electricity going into my car. So I'm a participant in a program called Optimize Your Charge, operated through a company called WeaveGrid that collects EV charging data from the vehicles to support utility programs like Optimize Your Charge. So by participating in this program and regularly charging my car at off-peak times, I get a $50 annual rebate. And the data is collected from either dedicated chargers, if you're one of those relatively few people who have one, or from the vehicle manufacturer's cloud database. And according to the people I talked to at WeaveGrid, most of the participation is through that latter method. So what I've granted WeaveGrid the permission to do is use my Tesla credentials to grab my data out of the Tesla data warehouse in the cloud. It will tell them, when I start charging, when I stop charging, how many kilowatt hours were pulled into the car through that. And what WeaveGrid is finding by comparing what the car is saying versus what they can see from the Xcel meter while the car is charging is that the accuracy of the in-car meters varies wildly by make and model. There are actually now two industry studies on this very topic. One, a national study conducted by the Electric Power Research Institute. Lead of that study was Tom Cook from EPRI. There's also a Minnesota-specific study the Trade Association for America's Electric Co-ops, Great River Energy, and Co-op participated in that study. Michael Hine from Great River Energy was the project. Both of these studies came to the conclusion that there was too much variability in the accuracy of the in-car meters to make them suitable for either utility billing or taxation purposes. So both of them, as well as Matthias Bell from WeaveGrid and Dan Bowerson from the Alliance for Automotive Innovation, representing the manufacturers, are all prepared to testify before us about their studies. And they will all consistently tell you that right today, and for the foreseeable future, there is no feasible way to accurately collect charging data from vehicles themselves. And so the basic conclusion from this is that it will not be feasible to collect accurate vehicle charging data suitable for billing or taxation from the vast majority of electric vehicles that are charged for home for the foreseeable future. Okay, so I want to point out one more thing about the path that we're AAA estimates that the average cost of electricity at a public charging station in Minnesota is currently about 35.4 cents per kilowatt hour. So charging at home, I personally am on the residential time of day rate plan, which is based on the whole home metering. There's no dedicated charger. And I pay 5 cents a kilowatt hour for charging overnight, which under that plan is defined as 9 p.m. to 9 a.m. and weekend. If I want to put a dedicated meter in my garage, it'll cost me $16.63 a month, but I get the rate down to 3.8 cents per kilowatt hour from it's actually 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. So, and I'll note also that a state sales tax of 6.75% is collected on all of the electricity going into the EVs, no matter where they're charged. So what we're walking into is a situation where if you charge your EV at home, which 80% of us do, you're able to take advantage of very low off-peak rates. And there's no way to tax feasible way to tax that electricity. So we're only going to be charging 5 cents a kilowatt hour to those 20% of the people who can't charge at home and are paying an average of I don't think it's fair.
Representative Elkins, can I interrupt?
Yep.
How many kilowatt hours do you charge a month?
I'm going to talk about that.
Oh,
I think I even have a slide.
okay. I'm ahead of you. Sorry.
Well, maybe. So basically, I've calculated that I drive about 1,000 miles a month. So in a year, I drive about 10,000 miles. My car is 8.5 years old, and it has 85,000 miles in it. So 1,000 miles a month. It uses 300 watt hours to travel a mile, and yes, 300 watt hours per mile is kind of a flip from gas. So at 1,000 miles a month, that means I'm consuming at an average month about 300 kilowatt hours. And so at 5 cents a kilowatt hour, my total fuel bill.
The reason I asked, unfortunately, I didn't bring my phone today, so I'm doing all this math by hand, but I'm pretty good at that. Anyway, the reason I ask is it would take quite a bit to offset the 1.2 cents per kilowatt hour in savings that you would get from investing $16.63.
The
Yeah,
payback
you'd never,
period is infinite. It never.
yeah, you'd never
pay
get
for
there.
itself. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Mhm. So the third alternative is mileage-based user charges, which does reflect the user pays principle. The more you drive, the more you pay. It only requires odometer readings, which are readily available, and has already been implemented in 4 states: Oregon, Utah, Virginia, and Hawaii. And I have been going to school on Utah, and I can easily get folks from Utah. So how would this work? So like we saw with WeaveGrid for collecting electricity for charging data out of your car, you can also pull odometer readings out of your car the same way. So for example, there is a company called Smart Car, which is kind of the leader in this space. have reverse engineered the APIs for all of the manufacturers. So all late model cars come equipped with an accurate GPS unit and a cellular modem. The manufacturers are already continuously collecting all manner of data from their cars to their data hubs, including odometer readings. Those odometer reads can be read from the manufacturer's data hubs via their application programming interfaces with the owner's app credential. So if you have an app for your car on your phone, that app is communicating with the vehicle manufacturer programming phase. That's how the data gets back and forth. So you can use that same interface using a company like SmartCar to transfer this data to an administrator at relatively low cost. And this is a relatively new development. It's most cars built since about 2017 have the cellular modem and the GPS unit. Pretty much all cars built since 2021 have the So in other states, a third-party administrative company administers the road user charge program. Oregon, Utah until recently, and Virginia all use a company called Emovis. And Utah has been for a while now using SmartCar to collect the odometer readings. So no trip data needs to be collected. No detailed data is held by Driver and Vehicle Services or MnDOT. And the data privacy of these odometer readings will be governed by the Minnesota Consumer Data Privacy Act, which is now in effect. So the integration between Emovis in particular and our existing has already been done for Oregon, Utah, and Virginia. Our DVS team, talked to the folks in Utah from the FAST team there, and the fiscal note for my mileage-based road user charge bill was only like $200,000, and they said we could probably do this implement this in about 2 months. Okay. So there's another alternative that could even be cheaper, as a company called GeoToll that collects the mileage data from your smartphone, calculates the mileage charge, generates the invoicing, does all with one-stop shopping. And periodically, you take a picture of your car's odometer to kind of true up their calculated mileage reading. Nobody thinks that I talk to thinks that this is the long-run solution, but in the short term, this might actually be the most cost-effective way to implement something. MnDOT partnered with their counterparts in Kansas on a pilot, and Kansas tried technology out as well, and we could get a presentation from them on that one. So how would the charge be calculated? Take the example of a Ford F-150 pickup. So a regular Ford F-150 pickup gets about 19.4 miles per gallon, the average for pickups. Driven 11,500 miles, which is the average number of miles a vehicle is driven, not the number of miles that a driver drives, because we have more cars than we have drivers, and many people drive for work. Minnesota, that's the MnDOT estimate. At a gas tax of 31.8 cents a gallon, that pickup would pay a total of about $189 a year in gas taxes. So to calculate the equivalent fee for the Ford F-150 Lightning, the electric version of the F-150, it gets the equivalent of 68 miles per gallon, but driven 11,500 miles to generate $189 would require a mileage rate of 1.464 cents per mile. So that's how the rate would be calculated. And there would be, in the proposal I have before the legislature right now, there would be 5 rates based on the size of the car. These are the 5 EPA vehicle classifications. They calculate average mileages at this level, so it's easy to calculate what the equivalent mileage rate would be. using their numbers, and it comes out from about a penny a mile to 1.6 cents a mile for a pickup truck. Okay. And under my proposal, these fee levels would be tied to the gas tax and average vehicle MPG. And so they would automatically adjust as the gas tax goes up. And, each time an EV replaces an ICE vehicle, it would be generating the same amount of revenue than the equivalent ICE vehicle would have paid. And so revenue should stay level. So why not just do mileage charges for all vehicles? Well, the cost of the collection cost is coming down, probably down more like 5% of revenue as opposed to. It's still not nowhere near as efficient as the gas tax itself. Gas tax only costs about 0.2% of revenues as opposed to about 5%. And so putting everybody on a mileage tax would increase the. Plus, the other thing is that if any internal combustion engine car, from pre-2017 or probably pre-2021, would not have the technology necessary to collect the tax, which is why I'm saying let's just do this on EVs for now. So I know this question is going to come up, so just address it proactively. But we talk a lot about the difference in the weight between EVs. Not actually that great, but in any case, and I'm sure the chair is familiar with but the relationship between vehicle weight and road damage is not a linear relationship. Within the range of weights of passenger vehicles, which is 2 to about 5,000 pounds, the difference in the road damage is very small. It's really not until the axle weight approaches the design speed of the road that you start seeing serious amounts of road damage. So this is an example I pulled out of Wikipedia. The load on the road from one axle is 10 times greater than a truck for a car. However, since the fourth power law says that the stress or damage to the road, and this ratio is raised to the fourth power. So again, the bottom line is the resulting stress difference between a truck and a car is 15,000 to 1. So while charging a mileage raise that is based on the weight of the vehicle class does account to some degree for whatever weight-related increase in damages that EVs charge, it really is not a significant factor in road damage. So that's pretty much it. So there's a bunch of other slides in here that are hidden that you can peruse at your leisure. Some that I stuck in there anticipating some questions. But at this point, I'm ready to take questions, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative Elkins. I have some questions, but I would like to open it up to the floor first. Do we have any questions online, Austin? Okay, no questions online. All right, go ahead, introduce yourself so that those online know who's talking.
Aurora Vatrin, 100%. What is the cost of a program like GeoToll?
That would be determined through negotiation. Using Emovis, some of the early states we're seeing that the Emovis charges were practically eating up the whole the whole tax. Of course, part of that was that until the last couple of years, the states doing this had to use the diagnostic port plugins to collect the mileage, and those plugins cost about $75 a piece. And when you took into account the cost of administering and distributing those diagnostic port plugins, really made the cost go way up. So being able to bypass the dongle, collect the odometer readings directly from the car through direct telemetry really reduces the cost significantly. I should add that I have already I have been in conversations with the people at Fast Enterprises, and they said, yeah, it would be relatively easy for them to build this into our current driver and vehicle administration system They just need a state to partner with to do it.
Aurora, do you have any other questions? Anybody else have a question? Oh, good. Bentley, I'm still doing math up here. Thanks.
Bentley Graves from the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce. Thanks, Representative Elkins, for all this information. So I guess is maybe piggybacking off of Aurora's question is one of the drawbacks at this point just the cost of collection and making this go as compared to what we have with the registration fees. I mean, I'm just trying to get a sense. You make a compelling case, but what's the biggest drawback here? Is it just that it costs a lot to implement this at this point?
It doesn't cost a lot to implement, but the only reason to not do this for all cars, cars built before certainly any car built before 2017 doesn't have the requirement. So it's just not practical to do this for you would have to use the diagnostic port plugins, which the states that have piloted using that approach found just chews up way too much of the revenues. So it's really the ability to collect the odometer readings through direct telemetry that really brings the cost down. But it's still going to cost more than the gas tax.
Mm-hmm.
There is no tax of any kind anywhere that is efficient from a collection purposes point of view than the gas tax. There's, it's costing us what 0.02% to collect it, because when you collect it at the wholesale level, there are only 12 wholesalers in the whole state. There's no way any other tax is going to be as efficient as the.
Mm-hmm.
And what is the, I guess maybe what is the kind of the estimated cost to collect for this type of approach, even with the telemetry?
So when you talk to the folks at Smart Car, for example, they'll say that their asking price is about $5 per collection. So if you collect, assume you collected quarterly, that would be $5 a quarter would be $20 a year, but that can probably be negotiated down. So one of the reasons why you would want to keep a company like GeoToll in the running, even though you don't think that technology is going to be what wins out in the long run, is to improve DVS's bargaining power with the vendors.
And what would be the kind of cost estimate for going with that platform instead?
You won't know until you. Thank you. But we could probably, if we had the people from Kansas who use them in a pilot, it wouldn't be that hard to get a bid for. I know the guys at that company as well, and they would be happy to present to us as well. As would the people from Smart Car.
Thank you, Bentley. Any other questions on the floor? We do have 2 questions online. I'll go to Carolyn Berninger first. Carolyn?
Hi, good morning. Thank you. And thanks, Representative Elkins, for the great presentation. I'm just curious, in some past conversations on this topic, I have heard that there's a hesitancy or a concern on behalf of some vehicle manufacturers around sort of being the ones providing the data or sort of interfacing with the third party to provide that odometer data. I'm wondering if that's something that you've heard in your conversations, and if you could provide any detail about what that conversation has been like with the automakers.
Sure. I speak with the auto innovators fairly frequently, and they understand that under the Minnesota Consumer Data Privacy Act and its equivalents in 19 other states, they have a responsibility, a legal duty to provide a consumer's data to them upon request.
Carolyn, is that good? Do you have a follow-up?
So, yeah, so they don't want to do it, but legally the consumer has a right to access to their data.
Okay, thank you. That is helpful.
Thank you. Senator Howe has a question online. Senator?
Well, thank you. And I'm late to the meeting. I had a previous engagement that took a little longer than I had anticipated, so I missed most of Representative Elkins' presentation. and I apologize if you've already covered this, but does this just cover Minnesota residents, or do we also collect from those that are passing through our state that don't reside in Minnesota?
Representative Elkins?
Yeah, so this would be open to the owners of cars that are registered in Minnesota.
Senator Howe?
Well, and I see that's where the shortcomings are, and that's the same problem I have with the registration fee, is that we're not collecting that from those folks that are out there, but it would satisfy that one piece. The question I have is if we implement the charge for fueling, as a tax on per kilowatt at the charging station, if that individual is a Minnesota resident, are they going to get taxed twice then? Once on the mileage and then again at the charging station?
It's a good
No,
question.
I think what since Senator Howe arrived late, I think what would be better probably, Senator, if you want, I can give you a personal walkthrough, because so we did kind of cover most of this as we're going through this. But one thing I would add right now for the group is that the trucking industry, interstate trucking industry, has a clearinghouse for mileage data. So the fuel taxes from interstate trucks are apportioned from the vehicle to the various states that the truck drives through based on the amount of mileage that the truck drives in each state. And this clearinghouse, what is it called? Does all of the math in the background. So if the mileage-based user fee caught on in more states, which we had a critical mass of states, we could, in fact, the leaders of the IFTA have told me, told the whole National Conference of State Legislators that when we get to that point, they would be happy to be the clearinghouse among states for these mileage-based user fees on passenger vehicles as well.
We have one more question online, but we don't know who the person is because it just says Zoom user. So Zoom user, do you want to identify yourself and tell us your question?
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is Representative Tom Murphy. I'm on the road, so this is my cell phone.
All right,
Thank you,
welcome.
thank you, Representative Elkins, for your presentation. I have a question with regard to the mile-based user fee. When you talk about the different levels for a sedan versus a pickup truck and all the different markers, if weight's not an issue, why would we need more than one of those?
We still want to encourage people to buy more fuel-efficient vehicles. It's the same incentive that we have with the gas tax to buy a more fuel-efficient vehicle. We want that same principle to apply to electric vehicles as well.
And I drive a
Representative
pickup,
Murphy?
and thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Representative Elkins. I drive a pickup, a Silverado, a Chevy, and my brother just bought a Rivian, and that Rivian is 8,500 pounds, and my Silverado is 5,800 pounds. And so, if it does have any effect on also how it's broken down via weight, that would be something. If we're just asking people, we're going to incentivize you just for buying a more fuel efficient vehicle, I think that could be an issue for quite a few people. The other thing I wanted to ask you about is you talked about participation, and it looks like there might be some options for people as far as whether or not they participate. Can you explain that for me a bit?
Yes, Representative, that's a great question. So this program would be optional. You would either participate in the mileage-based user fee program, or you would continue to pay the electric vehicle surcharge. That's the way Virginia does it right now as well. In fact, they advertise their program using the slogan, drive less, pay less.
Representative Murphy, is that good for you?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Representative Elkins, just one more follow-up. So in our case, in your program, there would be no chance that anyone would pay for both.
No, you would pay one or the other. You would either
Okay.
pay the registration surcharge or you would pay the mileage-based user fee.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Representative Elkins. You have given me lots of data to think about, and I really appreciate all your work. So
Thank
thank you. Our next, excuse me, our next presenter is online, I believe. Is he online? Yep. So Matt Bishop, who's the Policy Director for Sales and Excise Taxes at the Iowa Department of Revenue, is going to present next. His presentation, I believe, is in the materials. Is it, Danny, I assume? And he's going to talk about Iowa's experience as they've recently entered into this same environment. So Matthew, thank you and welcome.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Yeah, as you said, my name is Matt Bishop, Policy Director for Sales and Excise Taxes here at the Iowa Department of Revenue. Thank you for having me. I know tax administration works better for the state and the public when states can collaborate. So I really appreciate the chance to be here. I know I learned a few things listening to Representative Elkins. I saw some familiar things too, you know, especially that picture of the charging outlet in the garage. We have an EV in our household too, and our garage looks just like that. Let me pull up my presentation. Was that sharing with everybody?
Yep, so everybody in the room, it looks like this. Mine was at the very bottom. Thank you. Go ahead, Matthew.
Okay. Great. Thank you very much. Go through a presentation, kind of using our template. Start with our mission statement for the department, our standard disclaimer. Nothing I say is binding on the department. Here's my contact information. If you have any questions about the presentation or really anything about Iowa, I'd be happy to help you out or direct you to the right person. Start with a little background. So I'll have to start with the beginning with the Road Use Tax Fund. The Road Use Tax Fund is how Iowa funds roads within the state. Our Constitution and statutes protect the Road Use Tax Fund so that they can only be used for road purposes. The biggest funding source for a road use tax fund is our fuel tax revenue. The idea for the electric fuel tax goes back to 2018 when our legislature passed a bill requiring our state Department of Transportation to issue a report basically on the impact of EVs and other high efficiency vehicles on the road use tax fund. You know, concerns about capturing lost fuel tax revenue for electric vehicles that obviously don't pay anything in gas tax. Our DOT issued that report at the end of 2018, and based on that report, the legislature enacted a bill in 2019, signed into law May 16th. Relevant here, that bill provided two ways to capture tax revenue from electric vehicles. The first is a supplemental annual registration fee for electric vehicles, and that was effective on the next year, January 1st, 2020. And then the other one, which is the focus of presentation today, is our electric fuel excise tax. That went into effect July 1st, 2023. I did a little research into what Minnesota is doing, and I understand you've already passed a bill to enact your equivalent of the electric fuel tax. So similar to Minnesota, Iowa also excludes charging in a location other than a residence. So we've got some similarities between the two. So like I said, we had 4 years to prepare for this electric fuel excise tax. This is just kind of a quick overview of everything that we did to prepare for the electric fuel tax. External communications, we programmed our computer systems. I want to point out that we started a 5-year modernization project in 2020. So this electric fuel excise tax went into effect right in the middle of that. So we completely overhauled our computer systems in that time, built an entirely new system from scratch. So this slotted real well into that. We updated our fuel systems also in 2023. So we were able to do that at the same time. You can see the whole list of other things that we did there. I don't need to go into specifics on that. Now, an overview of our electric fuel tax, but we need to start with the supplemental annual registration fee. Like Representative Elkins mentioned, 80% of charging happens at a residence. So we've carved out that 80% from the electric fuel tax. We need to recapture that funding somehow. The way we capture that is with the supplemental annual registration fee. I understand Minnesota does something similar, but Iowa just has a flat registration fee for all electric vehicles. You can see that we phased that registration fee in over 3 years. Since 2022, that fee has been in full effect, and it's $130 for a full battery electric vehicle, or half that, $65 for a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle. I'll also point out that $130 is equal to driving 13,000 miles for a vehicle 30 miles per gallon and paying 30 cents per gallon in taxes. And that's our tax rate on gasoline. This is our statutory language. Excise tax of 2.6 cents is imposed on charging electric vehicles at a location in Iowa other than a residence. And we have our definition of residence. I think Minnesota defines residence in exactly the same way, so I can tell you exactly how we've applied that. In order to pay the electric fuel tax, the owner of the charging station must have an electric fuel license. The owner of the charging station is the one who's responsible for filing and paying the electric fuel tax. Point out that even if there's another entity who's managing or controlling that charging station, it's still the owner who's the one who's responsible for filing and remitting the tax. The license is issued for the physical charging location. So what I mean by that is the address. So you've got a charging location at 123 Main Street. That's the location that has the license. You know, there might be 2, 4, 8 actual charging stations with the plug at that location, but it's only the physical location that needs the license. Iowa has 2 different licenses for electric fuel tax. One is a user, where you're putting electric fuel into your own electric vehicles using your own electric charging station. The other type of license is a dealer. That's where you're using your charging station to charge other people's vehicles. So we split the licenses that way. Would also note that if you have an electric fuel license, you may also need a sales and use tax permit. At the very least, if a charging station charges to park there, parking is a taxable service in the state of Iowa. So I know a lot of charging stations will charge specifically for being in that spot, especially if you go over your time to charge. So there'll be a charge that way. We impose sales tax on that. Users will register for their permit and file their returns through GovConnect Iowa. GovConnect Iowa is our one-stop electronic portal for all filing purposes, all tax purposes within the state of Iowa. Like I said, we did a 5-year modernization project. A big part of that was setting up GovConnect Iowa. Like I said, the tax went into effect July 1st, 2023. We opened registration on April 3rd, 2023. So users had a few months to register and get prepared that way. Our statutes require charging station testing. So kind of like your gas pumps need to be tested every couple of years. These charging stations also need to be tested every couple of years. Our Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship is the entity that's responsible for testing the fuel pumps. They also test our charging stations within the state of Iowa. So the licensees need to file an electric fuel tax return. Your account files one consolidated return using GovConnect Iowa. So it's just one big consolidated return. That return is personalized for the licensee. If they have multiple locations, each location is listed separately on the return. At that point, the return is pretty straightforward. You just enter in the amount of kilowatt hours dispensed at each location. Our system will automatically multiply by that 2.6 cents per kilowatt hour. That'll get the total that needs to be remitted. Those returns and the tax are due every 6 months. So you can see we have a July to December period. That's due at the end of the month following the period. So the July to December is due January 31st. January to June, due July 31st. We also need to provide a way for refunds and exemptions for these electric fuel. The refunds and exemptions follow the same limited refunds and exemptions for other fuel types. Those are limited to mostly government entities or off-road use. In Iowa, there is no upfront exemption for fuel, so we applied something similar for electric fuel, where you'll need to have a permit to request a refund of electric fuel, and then you'll file that again through GovConnect Iowa. But we were able to administer this electric fuel similar to like a sales tax where you can request an upfront exemption. For that, we developed an Iowa fuel tax exemption certificate separate from the standard sales and use tax exemption certificate. So a purchaser could just supply that exemption certificate up front to their supplier, and they could get an upfront exemption. Give you some statistics on how it's working. This is just a list of our electric fuel tax rate versus other fuel tax rates. If you're curious, I can go into more detail on this, but just so you can see how those tax rates work. And I'll also note that sounds like similar to Minnesota, we impose the tax on fuel above the rack. So anybody who possesses fuel above the retail level in the state of Iowa is responsible for paying the fuel tax. So those other fuel taxes are not paid at the retail level. Here are our registered vehicles in the state of Iowa. So you can see last year we had 7,200 plug-in hybrid electric vehicles registered in the state of Iowa versus over 10,000 battery electric vehicles in the state of Iowa. That's out of 1 million just registered automobiles in the state of Iowa. And I think we're at like 4.5 million registered motor vehicles if you include all commercial vehicles and trailers. So you can see that the number of electric vehicles is growing rapidly, but it's still a pretty small slice of the total automobile fleet within the state of Iowa. More statistics. I had this checked just before I gave the presentation. 344 active electric fuel accounts in the state of Iowa with 726 charging locations. Again, more than one charging location can be on a electric fuel licensee or electric fuel account. The first year that we collected the fuel tax, you can see just over 200,000 electric fuel tax compared to 1.8 million in supplemental registration fees. Again, remember, over 80% of charging happens at a residence. So we've designed the fuel tax so that about 80% of the tax revenue that's captured comes from those supplemental annual registration fees. So again, that electric fuel tax is about 20% of what's actually intended to be captured from the electric fuel. So if you're looking at the total amount of tax revenue that Iowa captures from electric vehicles, it's important to keep in mind those registration fees in addition to the electric fuel. Then you can see the electric fuel tax revenue that we collected last year increased substantially, more than doubled to over $500,000. And then by fiscal year 2028, we project to collect over $1 million in the electric fuel tax and 4.7 million in supplemental annual registration fees. And just for comparison, we have about $2 billion transferred to the road use tax fund last fiscal year. So again, these electric vehicle taxes are a very small slice of that road use tax fund, but they're increasing fairly rapidly. You specifically asked for some of the challenges that we encountered with the our electric fuel, so I'm going to go into detail on that. Maybe our biggest challenge is, I guess, what we call free charging stations. In the state of Iowa, free charging stations are still responsible for filing and remitting the tax on that electric fuel that's dispensed. I believe these generally create more issues. These are smaller charging stations. I can go into more detail on some of the issues that these cause a little later. As I understand it, Minnesota excludes these free charging stations, so hopefully that'll be a little easier for you to administer. Hopefully you don't encounter as many of these issues that we do. We have had interest in Iowa in excluding these free charging stations. I'd be curious to see how that goes in Minnesota. Just off the top of my head, what does free mean? If a store offers free charging, that store is offering it in the hopes that you'll come in and spend money. Do you still consider that free? If a hotel has charging stations in their lot for guests to use, they might not charge for the charger, but you're expected to pay for the room in order to use the charger. So is that still considered free? Something else I thought of would be a business, like a delivery company, like an Amazon or a UPS. Maybe they use their own chargers for charging their vehicles. Do you still consider that free? I don't know. I'd be curious to see how that works in Minnesota. Another challenge that we've had within the state of Iowa is finding charging stations. Charging station can be located literally anywhere. If you're looking for a gas station, those are usually pretty easy to find, but a charging station, it could be in a store, is at a hotel, a standalone parking lot, government buildings, just about anywhere. There's no centralized listing of charging stations. So, I mean, it feels like we're always finding new charging stations to look at and make sure that they're registered. Once we find a charging station, we need to figure out who actually owns that charging station. Like I said, you could have a charging station that's on real estate that's owned by a different person, and then there might be a third person who's actually even managing that station. So, I mean, we can look at property records, see who owns 123 Main Street, but that owner might just be a landlord, might not know anything other than they've got a tenant, and their tenant has installed those charging stations. So we need to locate that tenant who owns the charging station, and then maybe that tenant is kind of a hands-off owner and relies on a third party to manage the station. They might not have the information to file and remit taxes to us. So we'll have to work with that owner and make sure that they get the information that they need from the party that actually manages their charging station. So that's been a challenge that we've had to deal with. Determining the amount of electricity use has been a big issue. Hopefully that's less of an issue if you're focusing on the paid chargers. Hopefully paid chargers will be able to track the exact amount of electricity that comes out. We have previously said that separate meters are helpful in determining the amount of electricity that's being dispensed. You know, hopefully there's a meter that's measuring exactly how much is coming out of that charging station. But we've also run into charging stations that will have solar power. So they'll use solar to provide some of the energy that's going into that electric vehicle. While that separate meter only measures exactly what's coming off the grid. It doesn't measure what's coming out of the solar panels. So that's been a complication for those that have solar panels, or maybe they've got a wind turbine that's providing some electricity. It just complicates things to figure out exactly how much is coming out of that charging station. So if we can't measure exactly how much is coming out, we need to do an electric study. I'm sure you can imagine all sorts of problems with an electric study where you're monitoring how many vehicles are using your charging station, estimating electric usage that way. Some of these charging stations have little monitoring. Like I said, some of the owners are pretty hands-off, so they might not be keeping an eye on these charging stations, and it's difficult for them to know exactly how much use they're getting. One specific owner that we've had an issue with is campgrounds. You know, campgrounds usually have very little monitoring. Just, you know, here's your spot and here's a charging station, and, you know, just pay on your way in or your way out. Those campground owners have had a lot of difficulty doing an accurate electric study. And honestly, some of the smaller owners have just flat out refused to do an electric study. They've told us just estimate us and bill us, and we'll pay what you think we owe. We have really struggled in coming up with an estimated billing, partly because this is so new, partly because we just don't know how much use any charging station gets. On top of that, we might not even know how many charging stations are at a charging location. So we've really struggled in figuring out exactly how much to estimate a non-filer or a non-registered location should have to pay. We exclude a residence. Similar to Minnesota, we have broadly interpreted residence to mean any single or multifamily residential property. So a single family house is a residence, multifamily house is a residence, an apartment complex where every unit is rented out, that's still a residence. As long as people are residing there, we're considering that a residence. That creates some odd lines to draw. For instance, take an extended stay hotel or maybe an apartment complex that rents out by the week. They might have some residents, well, some people staying at the location for a couple of weeks. They might have some people staying for a couple of months or longer. Do you still consider that a residence? That's a line we haven't had to draw yet, but I know that there's out there. What if a property has stations for residents and visitors? Like we've had colleges. They've said, you know, well, we've got these charging stations for the students to use in their dorms. We've got other charging stations for anybody on campus to use. We've said that those dorm chargers would be considered residential, so no taxes due, but the other chargers, that's non-residential, so taxes due. It's been a difficult line for some of those colleges to draw to determine which ones are exactly for the dorms and which ones aren't. Another question is, what if a business electric vehicle is charged as at a residence? So what I mean by there is, if you've got two businesses that might be identical, one is operated out of the home, one isn't, that home-based business can take advantage of that residential charging exclusion. So the home-based business doesn't pay any electric fuel tax. That identical business that's based out of like a traditional brick and mortar location, they are responsible for paying the electric fuel tax. So that's an uneven treatment of the two businesses. As I mentioned, we test the charging stations in the state of Iowa. Our IDOLS is the abbreviation for the entity that tests that. Department of Revenue is the entity that's actually responsible for paying for that testing. So we need to set up agreements between the two agencies for payment. We need to make sure that we have agreements to share information, because of course the Department of Revenue, we take taxpayer information confidentiality very seriously. So we need to make sure that we have full authorization to share any information with our IDOLS. Some of the challenges that IDOLS has told to me is that, again, charging stations can be anywhere. I think IDOLS initially thought that they could do a lot of testing while they're testing the other fuel pumps that they're responsible for. It doesn't work out that way, since they might have to go to a store, like I said, hotel, parking lot to test these. It's just not something that they can easily combine tasks to do. IDOLS also needed to purchase special equipment to do their testing. They needed to train their staff to do the testing, so that was an additional expense. Another issue they've run into is some of these charging stations require payment just to access the charger. I think Tesla is one of the big companies that they've run into where they'll need to pay a fee to Tesla upfront. I know they've been trying to get refunds for that. I don't know if they've been successful, but even if they are, that adds a layer of complexity to actually testing these charging stations. Some of the political issues we've seen, not necessarily an issue for the agency as administrators, but maybe as lawmakers, some things that you need to consider. Seeing the amount of electric fuel tax that's collected, but not the supplemental fees that are collected. What I mean by that is we've had some people who look at, again, last year we collected $500,000 in electric fuel tax. Some people will kind of panic, say, oh my gosh, that's all you're collecting from electric vehicles. No, it's important to keep in mind that there's the supplemental registration fees on top of that. So whenever you're looking at the amount of tax revenue that's collected from the electric vehicles, always keep in mind those registration fees in addition to the electric fuel tax. Question, is the excise tax rate appropriate? From what I could tell, Minnesota's tax rate is about twice Iowa's. I don't know what the appropriate fee is. Maybe Iowa's needs to come up. Just something for the lawmakers to consider on where they want to set those rates. Same with the registration fee. The fee is constant. I think Representative Elkins talked about maybe trying to adjust those fees to adjust for amount of miles driven, weight of the vehicle, cost of the vehicle. In Iowa, it's a constant fee or tax. So maybe lawmakers want to take a closer look at that. Some EV owners pay both the fee and the excise tax. Anybody registered in Iowa who can't charge at home is going to be responsible for paying both the fee and the tax. So maybe it's a business that can't use residential charging. Maybe it's somebody who just can't install a charger at their home. They would be responsible for paying both the fee and the tax within the state of Iowa. Some EV owners would pay neither. Maybe somebody based out of state works in the state. That's also a concern with gas tax. So maybe that's not such a giant concern. And finally, I'd say that our fee and tax are not indexed. So as costs increase due to inflation, the registration fee, the excise tax, that's not going to increase. So the lawmakers will need to step in and actually increase those fees and those taxes when the time comes. Additional resources, if you're interested in seeing our statutory language, I've got our site there. The administrative rules that we pass, that's there. Phone numbers, email addresses, websites. I'd also point out that our GovConnect Iowa has a chat bot that we call the Colonel. We're very proud of him. He answers a lot of questions, tells jokes. So you can check him out if you're at all curious. We're on our social medias. Thank you, and take any questions you might have.
Thanks, Matt. I'm going to ask the Colonel a question just for fun this afternoon, but that's a different story. Anyway, any questions in the room? Representative Elkins.
Madam Chair, yeah, just more of a, again, an observation than a question, but we'll run into the same issue here. But if you're living in an apartment building, can't charge at your residence, you'll get socked with both the registration surcharge and the fees for charging at a public station. So it's just hugely not fair.
Yep, we have
Thank-
gotten that concern, yes.
Thanks, Matt. Any other in the room? I know I have two questions online. Go ahead, introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Anjali Baines with Fresh Energy. I heard you talking about some of the additional staff costs it took to set up the program. I'm wondering, do you have a sense of what it did cost to, it sounds like maybe hire additional staff, do the trainings, purchase some other equipment to run the testing program specifically?
For the testing program, I do not know off the top of my head. Like I said, that's administered through our sister agency, IDOLS. So I don't have those exact costs. As far as the Department of Revenue, like I said, we were able to update our computer systems at the same time that we're doing our 5-year modernization project. So we're able to roll a lot of those costs into the modernization that we were doing anyway. I don't believe we needed to hire any additional staff, so we're just stretching our staff a little more. Of course, we would always welcome additional resources for compliance and education enforcement, but we were able to slot all of this into existing resources for that.
Follow-up? No? Okay, Representative Murphy is online. You have a question?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Bishop. I was just curious if you've done any determination of really where the traffic is, both for the charging stations and for the vehicles, as part of your decision. I mean, I know in Minnesota, a large portion of the EV market would be in the metro area. Our costs for building roads are higher in the metro versus in the rural. I'm in the rural. I was just curious if that was part of a conversation at all, is trying to get an idea where the concentration of EV vehicles are.
No, I don't believe that was in the conversations. Again, this originated with an idea in 2018, bill passed in 2019. That was kind of an eternity ago as far as electric vehicles are concerned. I'd also point out that Minnesota, of course, is a much bigger population center with the Twin Cities area. Iowa just doesn't have that. Iowa's probably much more rural on the whole compared. So yeah, I don't think those were consideration at the time.
Do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Just one quick follow-up. Of your 726 locations, where would they be? Are they primarily in your metro areas, or are they? Can you give me a percentage of where they are, or a rough idea anyway?
I don't have that detail. Just anecdotally, what I've seen is that they are in the metro areas. They are somewhat spread out throughout the state, so that if you're traveling throughout the state and you plan well, you could charge your vehicle every 100 miles or whatever. But yeah, they're not going to be in super rural areas. They're going to be in the metro areas.
Thank you both. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yep. Thanks, Matt. All right, Tony Quillis has a question. Tony?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Matt, you talked about an upfront exemption certificate for refunds. I guess first part is who's eligible for those? Is it cities, counties, state? And how many of those exemption certificates did you get or are anticipating?
So the exempt entities would be the same ones that are exempt for fuel. So it's a lot more limited than, say, a sales and use tax exemption. Kind of like what you mentioned, a lot of them are going to be states, localities, school districts. Those are the main entities who are exempt. The other ones who might be exempt would be somebody using it for off-road purposes. As far as the exemption certificates, we never actually see these exemption certificates unless we're auditing an entity. These exemption certificates go to the seller, and the seller keeps them in their records. So I guess those are just downloaded from our website, so we don't actually know how many of these exemption certificates are being used in the state.
You also briefly mentioned parking. Folks would have to pay the sales tax on parking. So the example, the hypothetical would be somebody would pull up to a convenience store, retail store, use the charger, are paying for it, for the electricity they're pulling out of it. But you've found that other retail facilities charge to park there for the half hour or hour that they're using, and they have to pay a sales tax on that?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, so yeah, some charging stations will charge just to park there, especially if you go over your charging time. You know, it might be free to park there for the half hour that you charge it, but if you leave your vehicle there for 10, 15 minutes beyond that, you got to pay for that 10, 15 minutes because of course they want turnover in that spot.
And then one last one is the you're requiring or doing the sales tax every 6 months. Did the legislature look at once a year? Would that be easier to implement for you, just doing once a year rather than every 6 months?
I don't remember if they looked at that or not. For the department, I'm not sure it makes a difference administratively to do once a year versus 6 months. It would probably be easier for the filers to do though. But I'm not sure we really looked at that.
Thank you, Mr. Bishop. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I have a quick question. I don't drive an EV, so I don't know if I pull up to a Quick Trip or somewhere totally like almost deflated with charge. What's a typical, like, and I realize there's different cars and all the things, but like, what am I looking at? How many kilowatt hours is a full charge? Maybe Representative Elkins knows that, or any other EV user in the room? Steve?
Well, I can, just my experience is that, again, my car battery will hold up to 75 kilowatt hours. And you know, that's enough to get me about 225 miles in my car. But and a typical night, you know, one of the cool things is that I come home at night, I plug it into the wall. From inside the car, it's scheduled to be fully charged by 7 o'clock the next morning. So it's taking advantage of the off-peak rates. And so if I'm using, you know, 300 kilowatt hours a month, that's about 10 a day.
Okay.
So, and then in level 2 charger, you're usually going to be charging at a rate of 30 to 40 kilowatt hours per hour. So my car probably charges about a typical night within about 2 hours or so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Steve. Does anybody have any other questions before we move on to our next speakers? All right, great. All right, our next speaker then, I think both of them are online. Oh, do we have another? Oh, Jeremy, go ahead. Jeremy Neek has a question online.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, hi, Matt. I've talked to you before about EV charging and such. I just had a question about the upfront certificates. Do you just have a one line item on your tax return for EV payers, or do you capture how much exempt sales? So do you have like 2 lines on your tax return, one for total less exempt sales?
I could double check that. I think it's just one line for taxable sales.
Okay. So then they would take your total kilowatt hours, deduct any exempt sales, and then report the net to you.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep, welcome.
So Jeremy is from Department of Revenue. Jeremy, I wonder, do you think there might be is there a perceived value in capturing how much exempt charging has happened?
That's a question we're throwing around right now, whether we want 1 line or 2 on our tax return. We do capture it for liquid gasoline and special fuels today, how much is exempt for government sales, off-road use. So we're just wondering if this is something we want to capture when we create our tax return, when we go into effect in 2027. So we're trying to kind of monitor what other states are doing, and see what best practice is.
Yeah, agreed. And just so you know, we've been meeting with DOR to also determine what the appropriate frequency might be. So somebody had asked that question in the room, or perhaps it was Representative Murphy. I can't remember. And, oh no, I think it was Tony who asked that question. Anyway, again, I really encourage anybody who has questions in between the meetings, or if something comes up, if you could let me and Danny Gillis know. This is really a data-rich investigation as far as I'm concerned, and we're trying to make sure that we explore all of the issues around this. So this is an open forum. So if you have questions or concerns, I would hope that you would let us know so that we can be prepared for the next meeting and bring in speakers who might inform the many issues that we're grappling with here. So thanks, Jeremy, for being online. Thank you, Matt, for that valuable presentation. And I know we're going to be talking to you again as we continue to move forward. So our next speakers are both online, as I said before, Anjali Bains from Fresh Energy and Carolyn Berninger from Great Plains Institute and Drive Electric will be presenting next. So, oh, I'm sorry. Oh, Anjali is here. I'm sorry.
Hi, thank
Go
you,
ahead.
Madam Chair. Yeah, actually, I think Carolyn will kick off first. Also,
Okay.
is this too close? Am I talking too close to the mic? No, this is good. Carolyn's
Sounds
gonna
good
kick off with
online.
an EV market overview, and then I'll pop in with a few slides at the end.
Thank you.
Yes, thanks. And hopefully everyone is able to see my screen. I will be sharing both my slides as well as Anjali's. So first, thanks so much for the time on the agenda. Really looking forward to sharing some perspectives on the electric vehicle market and a few of our perspectives on EV taxation in general. So my name is Carolyn Berninger. I facilitate Drive Electric Minnesota. We're a partnership of Minnesota Electric Vehicle Champions dedicated to encouraging EV deployment and the establishment of electric vehicle charging infrastructure. We have a number of members throughout the state, including automakers, auto dealers, local and state government, electric utilities, clean energy and clean transportation organizations, and others. So kind of going to be zooming out a little bit from kind of where we've been so far in the conversation today, just to provide a few basics about Minnesota's electric vehicle market, hopefully answer a few questions that have come up thus far, and kind of setting the stage a bit for these discussions we're having, you know, who's impacted by the fees, how many vehicles we're talking about, and that sort of thing. So as you could see on this slide here, we have been seeing steady increases in the electric passenger vehicle market in Minnesota over the last several years. This graph here on the screen is from May 2018 to this past July. So we are seeing currently 6% electric vehicle, 6% of all passenger vehicle purchases in the state were electric in 2024. But we do have a long turnover period for vehicles, and even seeing this sort of steady year-over-year increase, the number of vehicles on the roads in the state that are electric is currently just 1%. So we are seeing increases, but we're still talking about a very small number of vehicles and a small number of drivers, kind of within the context of the entire state. And just for some additional context, so the orange line here is battery electric vehicles, and this kind of flatter green line is plug-in hybrids, which are growing steadily but not quite as quickly as battery electric. Also wanted to just touch on what we have in the state in terms of public charging infrastructure. So this map here depicts public DC fast charging stations within the state. At one of our previous meetings, I know we were looking at maps of both level 2 and fast charging. The Minnesota public charging tax will only apply to fast charging, so filtered that out here. We currently have 787 fast charging ports or plugs at 247 different charging locations. As we've talked about a bit already today, we do see a pretty strong concentration of that public charging availability within the metro area, but we do see availability throughout the state. And of course, we expect and hope that availability will continue to grow. We have heard from the Minnesota Department of Transportation that we are going to need 4,000 public DC fast charging ports. So we're at less than a quarter of what's needed, and we'll need that by 2030 if we're going to meet the expected continued growth in EV adoption throughout the state. So hoping to see and maybe expecting to see those numbers to continue to ramp up. What we don't have here is sort of which of these charging stations are paid and which might be free. I think when we're talking about fast charging, there's less sort of free charging station availability than there is on maybe more of the level 2, but there could be some of these that are not currently paid. And then I want to talk a bit about charging patterns. So we've heard a lot already today about how most charging activity happens at home. We see that 80% number talked about a whole lot. And public charging, of course, that 20% includes both level 2 charging and DC fast charging. And we really are wanting to see both of those types ramp up, but really as part of this conversation, we're focusing most on the fast charging. But even as we continue to see public charging availability increase, we do expect to see the majority of charging activity continuing to happen at home, at least for those folks that have access to home charging. We expect that to be the case because it is so convenient. People get home, they plug in their car when they get home from work, they wake up in the morning and it's fully charged and they're on their way. They don't need to stop at a gas station. Home charging is also available at a very low cost, as we heard from Representative Elkins this morning. While public fast charging can be as expensive or more expensive than gasoline, home charging is very affordable. Those who charge at home also have the opportunity, also as Representative Elkins discussed, to participate in off-peak charging programs, which are available at even lower cost and have some grid utilization benefits that Anjali will get into in a moment. And Drive Electric Minnesota, we are really focused on this barrier to home charging access for those folks that may be renters and not have access to home charging, or residents of multifamily housing in general. There are barriers for home charging access for certain groups, and therefore some folks do rely more on public charging. And so we do have some concerns about kind of equity and fairness impacts of that. Some EV owners also have access to level 2 workplace charging, so that's a bit of a factor here, but maybe not sort of as prevalent as the other two. And really the public fast charging ports are, we feel, most useful for that on-the-go charging when we're talking about road trips, range anxiety, really longer trips, and providing flexibility, not something many people rely on every single day. I'd also like to talk just a bit about some factors right now that are sort of impacting the outlook for future adoption nationally as well as in Minnesota. We have sort of a lot of projections about expected increasing adoption, but we are in sort of a unique landscape in terms of electrification at the moment. So want to touch on a few things here, namely recent policy developments. I'm sorry, someone trying to speak? No, okay. Sorry, I thought I heard someone. Recent policy developments at the national level are leading to really increased uncertainty about what the future of electrification is going to look like. We have the EPA has announced rollbacks to national tailpipe emission standards. Those were previously expected to really significantly ramp up electrification. Those have been rolled back. Congress has passed resolutions rescinding California's and other states' authority to adopt stricter vehicle emission standards like Advanced Clean Cars 2 and Advanced Clean Trucks. Those were really expected to ramp up the market as well. So we're seeing sort of a lot of uncertainty about that regulatory impact on electrification. And we are seeing outlets like Bloomberg, New Energy Finance adjusting downward their outlook for electric vehicle adoption. So citing recent changes in US policy, as well as rising trade tensions and tariffs and a slow rollout of public charging infrastructure, they recently adjusted. They had previously been expecting 36 million EVs on the roads by 2030. nationwide. Now they're expecting 22 million. So quite a significant kind of downward adjustment in that projection. And we're also seeing in general the United States market really falling behind the global market. We've seen 25% of all passenger vehicles worldwide are electric, and more than half of new passenger vehicles in China. The US, we're quite far below that at 6% in Minnesota. And amidst all of this policy uncertainty, we're also seeing some kind of financial barriers increasing to electrification. We have state and federal purchase incentives eliminated or underfunded, federal investments in charging infrastructure being phased out, higher fees and taxes being implemented in Minnesota as well as other states, as well as in general, fuel costs for EVs are expected to rise, with household energy bills expected to increase due to higher electricity bills, due to the cancellation of federal clean energy investments. So while we still think EVs are a really good deal and we have low costs right now for fueling, we do kind of have some uncertainty around costs. And I think that may be leading some folks to be a bit more cautious about making the switch to an EV. Want to touch quickly on Minnesota's EV surcharge. I think we're all quite familiar with what the new surcharge system looks like. We have 0.5% of an all-electric vehicle's MSRP in year one, and then declining each year as the vehicle depreciates. Half of that for a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle, and the minimum surcharge at $150 annually in 2026, and then $100 beginning when the public charging tax goes into effect in 2027. This slide here shows some calculations that we put together on what the new EV surcharge will look like for EV owners, and particularly compared to drivers of comparable gas vehicles. So on the second row here, you'll see an estimated average gas tax for 4 different vehicle types. We've got a sedan, a compact SUV, an SUV, and a pickup truck. So those are sort of average gas tax for some of these more common vehicles that we see on the roads. And that's based on estimated mileage per person in Minnesota. And then beginning in the fourth row here, we have some different examples for what this new electric vehicle surcharge is going to look like in Minnesota. So in year one, we sort of have this sticker shock, which this is the highest fee that an EV owner will pay, right? When the calculation is based on their vehicle's full MSRP. So this is what folks are going to see next year when they go to register their vehicles. And then we also have a 3-year period average. So the average over the first 3 years of a vehicle's life, and a 7-year average. And the 3-year average is meant to really represent people who lease their vehicles. So if you're leasing a new vehicle every 3 years, you're going to sort of start over this MSRP depreciation every 3 years, and you'll pay this average. So it ranges from 210 to about 310, depending on the vehicle price. And then the 7-year period, which is the average length of time that an American owns a new vehicle. So those range from 172 to 253. So as you can see in each of these examples, which are based on new vehicles, the average EV fee is going to be higher than a comparable gas tax payment, particularly for folks that are buying those newer vehicles more frequently. Used vehicles, of course, are going to be a bit less impacted, although they're going to hit that $100 or $150 minimum more quickly, and then sort of pay that throughout the lifetime of the vehicle. And then finally, I just want to touch on a few perspectives from Drive Electric Minnesota before I turn things over to Anjali for some additional context. So our perspective is that electric vehicle drivers should, of course, pay their fair share to use Minnesota's roads, but they should not be required to pay more than owners of equivalent gas vehicles simply for choosing to drive an electric vehicle. We feel that a well-designed EV fee should reflect similar principles to the gas tax, such as rewarding more fuel-efficient vehicles. The electric vehicle market, as I've shown, is really nascent, and we're concerned that overtaxing electric vehicles today, while it's still such a small segment of the market, could make it harder for the state to meet its climate and electrification goals and could just hinder the EV market looking forward. And we'd like Minnesota to consider comprehensive solutions to provide long-term funding rather than just increasing fees on one really small group of drivers, looking at sort of the whole system. We have quite a large funding gap, and EV drivers are such a tiny piece that there should be sort of more included in the conversation. So that was my piece. Hopefully I haven't taken too much time. I think we're gonna walk through Anjali's slides as well, and then we can pause for questions for the both of us after that.
Certainly. Anjali, go ahead.
Awesome. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Carolyn. Hi, all. My name is Anjali Baines, and I lead the transportation team at Fresh Energy, is a Minnesota-based clean energy policy and advocacy nonprofit. We are also a member of Drive Electric Minnesota. So Carolyn covered a lot of really great basics about the EV market in Minnesota, and we want to provide the grid and public health benefits from EVs. Next slide. So as we all know, the fuel for EVs is electricity primarily provided through our distribution grid. So our electric grid is very dynamic with periods of high usage and periods of low usage on the grid. EVs are considered beneficial to the grid, as Carolyn mentioned, since they can actually charge during periods of low usage. And in Minnesota, this period typically occurs overnight when there is also an abundance of wind power, which makes fueling an EV in Minnesota especially good for our climate. For those who have access to home charging, as Representative Elkins mentioned, it's really easy just to plug in your EV and let it recharge as you sleep. And to incentivize this grid-friendly behavior, utilities offer EV-specific rates that are lower than the average residential electricity prices overnight and higher than the average rate during the day. To date, these programs have been very successful at getting EVs to charge during periods of low grid usage for those who can charge at homes. There's usually about 80% of charging that happens in the low period usage, also called off-peak charging. Next slide. So charging off the grid when demand for electricity is low means EVs are providing additional utility revenues while minimizing costs. This actually translates to downward pressure on electric rates for all ratepayers. In fact, analysis by Synapse Energy Economics found that since 2011, EVs in Minnesota have contributed almost $17 million in net revenue in Minnesota through utilities. So that really emphasizing the benefits of EVs not only to the grid, but also to other ratepayers. Next slide. And this is just a graphic illustration of the study I mentioned. There's also a link in that for folks who want to take a look after the fact. The slides will be up on the website. But you can see how much higher the green bar of EV revenues are compared to the associated grid costs that are required to support that EV charging. Next slide. All right, so since we're here talking about taxes, it's also important to mention, as Representative Elkins mentioned, that electricity is already subject to a sales and use tax, which applies to the dollar per kilowatt and other billing charges. The revenue from this tax flows into the state's general fund. Notably, there are some exceptions baked into this sales tax for specific end uses, such as for residential heating and for electricity used in industrial and agricultural production. I just highlight that because it's illustrative of the fact that taxes do play a big part in policy. So as we're talking about, roadway funding, we should also keep in mind other policy outcomes we want to see from the proposed solutions. Next slide. So this brings us to this graph, which is a comparison done just this past September by Atlas Public Policy, a research and analysis group based in DC. Atlas Public Policy looked at how much a fully electric vehicle pays in taxes compared to a gasoline vehicle, breaking it down between those who have access to home charging and so only use public charging about 20% of the time, as well as those who without any home charging and so rely on public charging 100% of the time. This shows in a different way what Carolyn just showed earlier, that EVs already pay their fair share and then some into roadway funding than what a comparable gasoline vehicle pays. When you add on the electricity sales tax, which is the light blue in this graph, the difference in state taxes is even more pronounced. And of course, since both EVs and gasoline vehicles pay the same motor vehicle sales tax and general vehicle registration fee, those aren't shown here. This report also points out that these taxes and fee make Minnesota the state with the highest EV penalty in the US at $442 per year. And the EV penalty is defined as how much more an EV driver who relies on public charging pays in road user fees and taxes than a gas car driver pays in gas taxes. It's also estimated that the actual revenue expected from the public charging tax specifically would account for less than 1/3% of roadway funding by 2030. This means the financial impact to individual EV drivers who rely on public chargers will be much greater than its revenues into our roadway funds. Next slide. There you go. So I wasn't actually here in our last presentation, but did get a download from my teammate, and I heard that there was a point that the operating savings of an EV were much higher than a gasoline vehicle, which I think just shows how EVs can be a boon in hard economic times like the ones we're currently experiencing. There are also additional public health benefits that EVs provide beyond a gasoline vehicle, given that they have low or no tailpipe emissions. And this gets back to, even though we are trying to find a sustainable source of funding for our roadways, there are other policy implications that we should keep in mind. Partly because transportation makes up the largest share of air pollution in Minnesota, which causes real harm to our residents. A report from the MPCA and MDH found that in 2015, an estimated 10% of deaths in the metro area were caused by air pollution, and 9% of premature deaths in Duluth, Rochester, and St. Cloud were caused by air pollution. It's also important to point out that the social and health costs of pollution is generally externalized to the public, with policy or regulations required to curb it. The pollution from gasoline vehicles is no different, and these societal costs are not currently included in their fuel or operating costs. Next slide. This is just a quick graphic representation of where the sources of air pollution are in the state. And you can see that across the state, transportation, which is the blue part, makes up the biggest chunk of air pollution, and for the metro. Next slide. Great, this is my last one about public health benefits. So finally, analysis completed by the American Lung Association shows the full breadth of social benefits that fully electric passenger vehicle fleet could have in the US by mid-century, if paired with carbon-free electricity like we're building towards here in Minnesota. That includes almost $1 trillion in public health benefits and almost 90,000 fewer premature deaths across the country. This also conversely shows a tremendous public cost we are all bearing from internal combustion engines if we don't allow the transition to cleaner zero-emission vehicles to continue as swiftly as it has been. Next slide. Great. And this is the final slide, which is our takeaways. Similar to what Carolyn mentioned, that EVs pay their fair share already into the gas tax, and there really is no more room to keep placing additional fees on EVs if we want the EV market to continue to grow here in Minnesota. Instead, we really need to be looking at other solutions to replace the lagging gas tax, which is coming from primarily increasingly efficient gasoline vehicles and not EVs, which make up 1% of our roadway funds. Of course, we do recognize those as that share increases. We want to have a solution that support EVs paying their fair share. And I also want to reiterate that as we talk about finding sustainable sources of funding for our transportation infrastructure writ large, we should keep in mind that the solutions we find will shape how our transportation system is built and whether we reduce public health costs or reach our state climate goal. Thank you.
Thanks, Anjali. Thanks to both Carolyn and Anjali. Does anybody have any questions? I see Bentley, so we'll go Bentley first and then in the back second.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I don't know if this is a question for Drive Electric or Fresh Energy, but you guys can maybe decide. But I guess I'm just kind of left with what is your preference? I mean, how should EVs pay?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I might be able to answer that more free presents Drive Electric Minnesota. So it's a bit more consensus-based organization among a lot of different interests. Fresh Energy over the years has been working with Representative Elkins on the road users charge, and really we do think that the improvements, Representative Elkins, you've been making and the kind of thoughtfulness at this juncture would help preserve the principles of the gas tax more readily for EVs than the relatively high flat EV fee. We know the administrative costs are a concern, but we're interested at this point in pursuing that for the longer term solution for specifically replacing the gas tax for EVs. Again, there's a bigger issue where the gas tax is only about a third of roadway funding, so we still need to find the sustainable sources of transportation infrastructure. But for the gas tax, we're leaning towards the road user charge.
And
Steve?
I would echo pretty similar response to Anjali. I think in the past we've been pretty okay with the flat fee surcharge when it was a bit lower, and we felt it more accurately replaced the gas tax. We have a lot of concerns with this new really higher fee. And similar to Fresh Energy, I think we're really open to continuing the conversation on the usage-based fee. It has a lot of advantages in terms of being opt-in, being user-based. It can reward efficiency in some ways. We do have some questions about that still in terms of the administrative cost and complexity, but definitely appreciate that conversation so far.
Thank you. I only called on Representative Elkins because it looked like you were going to say something, but if you weren't, that's okay.
No, I mean, that's obviously, this is an approach I've been promoting for years now, and I think that it's the most practical.
Okay. In the back, and then Margaret. Remember to introduce yourself.
Yep, Amanda Dewar with the Minnesota Auto Dealers. And this is more of just like a baseline question because Carolyn mentioned it in her presentation, and it was something that came up at our last meeting as well, saying that this per kilowatt hour tax only applies to level 3, DC charging. And I'm not seeing that laid out in the statute, but is that just because the size limitation being a capacity of 50 kilowatts? Okay, I've figured. Thank you.
So there was for those of you online, there was a nod affirming that. So is that your only question, Amanda?
That is.
All right, I'm going to move to Margaret Donahoe. Margaret?
Thank you. Margaret Donahoe with the Minnesota Transportation Alliance. I guess I wanted to get a little better sense of the most important factors when people are considering whether or not to buy an electric vehicle. If you could talk a little bit more about the tax incentives at the federal and state levels, how much were they? How much of a factor is that when people are considering buying an electric vehicle, plus range anxiety and other factors? Because I think at one point it was like $7,500 was the federal tax credit, plus a lot of states had additional tax credits of several $1,000s. So just trying to kind of put that into context, how much of a factor is an annual fee of $150 or even $200 compared to some of these other factors like tax incentives and range anxiety when people are thinking about buying an electric vehicle or not?
Sure, I'm happy to get us started. Thanks for the question. So to provide a little more context on the financial incentives at the federal level, until the end of September, there was a $7,500 tax rebate available for many different types of electric vehicles. It didn't apply to all EVs. It had some specifications about which vehicles qualified, as well as some income limits. But there was that was available for a number of years, but was just phased out early by the reconciliation bill on September 30th. And then in Minnesota, there was a $2,500 rebate that was in effect only for 1 year. It didn't receive very much funding from the state when it was passed in 2023. So it opened up and the funding was used up, I believe, within 1 day. And then that was it. So the state fee, the state rebate, I would say, was a bit less of a factor for folks, I think, when considering purchasing a new vehicle because of how it was implemented. Because it was only for 1 year, it was a very limited amount of funding, and it was actually to some extent retroactive because the bill was passed. People started purchasing their vehicles, but then the rebate program opened up the following spring. And so, it was just a bit complicated the way that it rolled out, and I think people weren't necessarily hinging their choice to purchase a vehicle off of the availability of that. Although it was certainly a positive for folks, it just wasn't really guaranteed at the point of purchase, if that makes sense. The federal incentive certainly was a really strong incentive, and I think was quite a strong motivator for folks. Electric vehicles still have a relatively high upfront cost compared to gas vehicles, although that has been coming down, and the vehicles are reaching more cost parity. In the past, electric vehicles have been more expensive to purchase upfront, even though they have lower lifetime fuel and maintenance costs. And so being able to have the availability of a strong rebate was quite effective. We've seen in some states that have had rebates and then repealed them, that has sort of led to an increase and then a decrease in the market. I think we'll expect to see that on a national level too, now that the federal rebate has been removed. And then to speak a bit about, I think there was a question about range anxiety. I think that is becoming slightly less of an issue for folks now that there's more public charging that people can see as they're driving around. We've already talked a lot about how most charging happens at home, but it is really important to have that public charging availability so people know if they want to go on a long road trip, they can do it. They're not going to get stranded, especially if they're a one-car family or they don't have a gas car as well. So I think we hear a bit less about range anxiety than we used to. Although, I'm sure it's still a factor for some folks. And it's just sort of a consideration. You may have to change a bit about your driving patterns when you choose to purchase an electric vehicle. You have to plan your road trips a bit differently. But you also have a lot of the benefits of convenience charging overnight, that sort of thing. And then I think there was a third question about, how much does the EV fee really matter when we're sort of looking at these bigger numbers of the federal incentive going away? And I would say they all layer on top of one another. So when people are hearing in the news that these incentives are gone, that the funding for public charging is being phased out in 2026, and now the fees on EVs are doubling and tripling in Minnesota, I do think that gives people some pause. There was a moment in the spring when the federal government was considering a $250 fee, and Minnesota's bill that was moving was $200. So under that system, a Minnesota EV owner would go from paying $75 a year to $450 when they renew their registration. And, that gave me pause as an EV driver, because it just is, it's something that's paid annually too. So whereas gas tax is paid in bit by bit each time you fill up, these annual fees are either, I think, causing concerns for folks, or they're going to surprise folks and then they're not going to have a good experience. So that was maybe a lot of different ideas strung together. Maybe I'll let Anjali add anything she wants to as well.
Anjali or Amanda? Anjali, okay, briefly, because we're coming up to the end of our meeting.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I will also say, I think I heard in there sort of how important are the operating cost savings. That is something we're hearing more and more, a reason why people want to stay on EVs and keep using them, especially on the used market. There's the new market, which is great, and we're trying to increase the sales there, but it's really the majority of Americans buy their vehicles used. So there is increasing sensitivity to making sure operating costs of the vehicles they do own are low and there are savings. So I know I read a report somewhere about this. I'll see if I can find it and send it out for it to be added to the website.
Thank you. Amanda, you had something to add?
Amanda Dewar with the auto dealers. Just going to add a little bit about consumer behavior here. With the federal EV tax credit ending on September 30th, July, August, September, big spikes in EV purchasing, in Minnesota and across the country, just because I think anyone who was on the fence was going to make that purchase while it was still available. So I think that definitely is a driver of consumer behavior. But I'll also say, from the dealer's perspective, when they're filling out the paperwork, and all the taxes and fees at the end, it is something, that previously the $75 EV surcharge, we were like, take it or, it makes sense. We want EVs to pay their fair share, but I think like based on a vehicle's value, that sticker shock. And then I think especially the following registration renewals, folks are definitely going to notice that. So yeah, we're concerned about that too, both at the initial interaction where our folks are the first line of explaining why this is so much and then ongoing. Thank you.
All right, thanks. We're going to move on since we're almost done with our time here. So thank you to our presenters. Peter Olson from MnDOT is now going to walk us through the average gas tax for Minnesotans. So thank you, Peter. And you have this presentation in your handouts. And then if we could have the Department of, who's our last one? DPS staff ready to go so that we get through both presentations if possible. I think the DBS person is online. Oh, excellent. You can go up and sit at the table if you want. Thank you. Thanks, Paul. All right, welcome, Peter.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I'm Peter Olson. I'm the lead alternative funding and financing analyst from MnDOT, here to go over real quick how we talk about average gas tax for Minnesotans. There we go. So our basic gas tax calculation is gas tax paid equals average VMT over average fuel economy times the gas tax rate. Seems pretty straightforward, but there's a lot of differences in those numbers that go in there. And that's kind of why you probably see a lot of different numbers when it comes to what the average Minnesotan pays for gas tax. So the first thing is VMT. So there's 4 ways we can look at VMT. So VMT per capita, which is total vehicle miles traveled divided by the population. That puts out about 10,102. We don't use this number a lot of the time when it comes to what the average Minnesotan pays in gas tax, because a large proportion, not a large proportion, but a decent portion of the population doesn't actually drive vehicles, those on elderly people, those who use transit. So it doesn't necessarily make sense in our mind to use that VMT per capita number. VMT per licensed drivers is the total vehicle miles traveled divided by licensed drivers in Minnesota. That's the number we used in our calculation that you'll see at the end of this PowerPoint, specifically because we were asked, what does the average driver in Minnesota pay? We feel like the best we can do for VMT per driver is per licensed driver. There is also VMT per household, which is total vehicle miles traveled divided by households in Minnesota. MnDOT doesn't necessarily have a number we would use for that right now, but we are doing a research project that will potentially provide us an updated number. And then VMT per vehicle, which is total vehicle miles traveled divided by number of vehicles in Minnesota, which is 11,500-ish. That's the number you probably saw in Representative Elkins' population or presentation. And that's the number we tend to use when you talk about vehicle ownership costs for Minnesotans, because when you talk about registration, that's charged per vehicle. And when you talk about something like an EV fee or a road user charge, that's charged per vehicle. So next, average fuel economy. This is not something that MnDOT updates yearly. We don't provide average fuel economy on a regular basis. So our best estimate we had at the time when we were asked for these numbers, which was in the middle of August, was a University of Minnesota prepared report in June of 2023 that showed average fuel economy in the state at around 21. So that was the number we used in our calculation. We are limited in which data we can use. There are probably some privately produced numbers that are different than the number I'm showing you right now, but we rely on some of these publicly available data sources where we can vet the data. As part of a new study, MnDOT has, as part of a larger MnDOT study, MnDOT pulled passenger vehicle VIN data from DBS, and MnDOT is analyzing that to produce a new fleet fuel economy estimates for gas, diesel, hybrid, plug-in electric, full EV, and flex fuel vehicles. MnDOT hopes to have those numbers available to report in late November. Preliminary numbers do look like that fleet average is probably closer to 20.9 or 21 miles per gallon now than that 20 mile per gallon we spoke of in June of 2023. But until we have final numbers, we won't be using those in our calculations. So when you go into our MnDOT's current estimate, so average Minnesota vehicle fleet, 20 miles per gallon, average VMT of 14,357, current gas tax rate for 2025 of 0.318, and we come to that $228 and 28 cents. And then for a new vehicle, we use the Department of Energy estimate for new vehicles, which is 27 miles per gallon, same VMT, same gas tax, and that amount paid is 169.09. And then with the gas tax index to inflation, we provided 2026 estimates.
Peter, can you tell me what those numbers are? Because I can't read them. So is it 173?
For the 2026, 173.35 and 234.02.
234. Thank you. Thanks a lot. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
And in the interest of time, we're going to go directly to the DVS. And then if we have time at the end, we'll answer questions. So.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the working group. For the record, my name is Greg Loper. I'm the Vehicle Services Program Director for Driver and Vehicle Services. It's my
Could you slow down? What's your last name?
Loper, L-O-P-E-R. I
Okay,
apologize.
thanks.
I'm
No,
trying to
You
be
do not. You have enough time.
wonderful. Thank you so very much. Madam Chair, it is my privilege and honor to bring before you data on behalf of the Department of Public Safety, providing the working group with surcharge and projections related to electric vehicles and plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. As I begin, I would like to start by noting a few things. First, while we have worked to provide relevant information in a timely manner, I am confident that there are other data points that would be useful for the working group. If you would like additional data that is not a part of this presentation, please reach out and we will do everything in our power to prepare it for you. Second, registrations are not static. Every day in Minnesota, vehicles are purchased, brought into the state, sold out of state, or scrapped. The data that I will be presenting is a snapshot from October 22nd. So while it is the most up-to-date data available and is as accurate as possible, inevitably, changes have already taken place since this data was produced. Finally, you will notice that our year-over-year data is based on a year that begins on October 22nd. That was done to provide the working group with the most up-to-date comparison possible. Driver and Vehicle Services will be providing updated comparisons at the beginning of the calendar year to any working group member who wishes to receive it, so that data on a calendar year basis is also available. On this one. Thank you so much. As of October 22nd, there were 57,489 electric vehicles and 23,267 plug-in hybrid electric vehicles registered in Minnesota. To put this into perspective, there are 7.9 million vehicles registered in Minnesota, and 5.1 million of those vehicles were passenger vehicles. This means that while the total number of EVs in Minnesota is significant, it is less than 1% of the vehicles on the road, 0.79%. When we combine EVs and PHEVs, this increases to 1.02%.
Wow.
At the same time, the number of my apologies.
Go back one. There you go.
At the same time, the number of EVs and PHEVs registered in Minnesota is growing. We have seen EVs grow substantially from 9,174 in 2020 to 57,489 in 2025. And we have seen PHEVs increase from 6,132 to 23,267 during that same time frame. This represents year-over-year growth between 25 and 57%, with growth between October 2024 and 2025 being 27% for EVs and 25% for PHEVs. Between 2020 and 2025, Minnesota saw a 527% increase in EV registrations and a 279% growth in PHEV registrations. The average age of EVs and PHEVs has remained relatively constant between 2020 and 2025, with the average age of EVs being 2.21 years and 2.63 years, and the age of PHEVs between 3.56 years and 3.9 years. This stability is primarily due to the growth in both EVs and PHEVs.
Thanks.
The average projected surcharge for EVs in calendar year 2026 is $208 $102.47. And for PHEVs, it is $102.58. The median surcharge is projected to be $191 for EVs and $89 for PHEVs. Slide 6 shows the projected surcharge to be paid by the 25th and 75th percent owners. Note that the 25th percentile is paying the minimum surcharge for both EVs and PHEVs, while the 75th percentile is paying $234.75 for EVs and $120 for PHEVs. 16,426 of EV and 8,026 of PHEV owners would pay the minimum. I would like to note that 33.43% of EV owners are expected to pay the minimum surcharge of $150, and 41.17% of PHEV owners are projected to pay the minimum surcharge of $75. The highest projected surcharge for an EV is projected to be $11,094 for a 2022 ATPG Battista. The highest projected surcharge for a PHEV is projected to be $1,272 for a 2022 Ferrari SF50. The base value of the Battista is $3,413,620, and the registration tax for the next registration period for the Battista, excluding the surcharge, is $34,957 for the period of July 26th through June of 27. The base value for the Ferrari is $570,445, and the registration tax for the next registration period, excluding the surcharge, is $8,021 for the period of February 26 to January of 2027. Finally, if I can take a moment of liberty, the registration tax estimate, including the EV and PHEV surcharge, can be calculated on DVS's website, drive.mn.gov, by selecting Vehicle Registration tabs feature and then selecting Estimate My Vehicle Registration Tax. You are also able to access, among other things, the latest registration tax paid as well. I would encourage any working group member who's not feature to explore this valuable tool. Madam Chair, thank you for the opportunity to provide this information to the working group, and I stand for questions.
Thank you. I'm so ignorant. I didn't know what a Battista was, and I thought for sure that was a typo, but I appreciate the humor, but the reality that there's probably going to be one driving down a locality near my house sometime in the near future. So that's enough said about that. Any other questions? That was really helpful. Both of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Any questions for either of our two presenters, Greg or Matt from the state? You know, I feel like today was really time well spent because I got so much good data and good information from all of our speakers. This is hats off to Danny, who's been putting these agendas together. I think that's been our objective, is to try to understand the kind of reality and the environment in which we are right now and how we might make the best decisions moving forward in terms of what's going to be impactful, what's going to be fair, and what's going to help us continue to fund our roadway and infrastructure system. So I feel really good about the last 2 hours. I'm grateful for all the presenters and the information that you brought today. Thank you. I feel like it's a lot. Anybody have any other comments before we adjourn?
Madam Chair, just real quick.
Representative Elkins?
I should have mentioned this when I was doing my presentation, but if you look at the soft copy that's posted online, the notes section on most of the slide has links to the backup materials as well.
So when you say soft copy, you mean the electronic version that we were? Yeah, and I noted also that I made notes also that there's quite a few links in all of the presentations that I know I will be accessing. So thank you to everybody for providing that. I think we are getting a sense of the immense amount of information that is going to be important as we move forward. So again, I'm just really grateful. Our next meeting, I believe, is November 20th. Is that correct, Danny? Yep. So our next meeting is 3 weeks from now, November 20th at 9 a.m. Again, I just want to thank everybody, but also encourage you if you have questions or ideas for additional presenters. We are really trying to get the majority of our work done in the next few weeks in terms of of setting the groundwork and then moving forward after that as we figure out just how best to address this issue. So, anything for the good of the order? All right, without hearing any, I'm going to adjourn and I'll look forward to seeing you on the 20th. We're adjourned. Good job.